Very good morning, Rob Riemen. We have our CIDOB conversation on some of your latest work. Rob Riemen is a Dutch philosopher. He's founder and president of the Nexus Institute. And he's come today to Barcelona to discuss, to fight against this age, to fight the nobility of spirit. Fascinating books, both of them, related to something that I would like to start our conversation with. And it is a simple question, but a very important one, I think. What is happening to democracy today that we question both the idea and the practice of democracy?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, and in a certain way also surprisingly, given our recent history, the 20th century was not that long ago. I mean, it's not like the Middle Ages, so it's recent history. We live in a time in which we see in real time the decline and fall of democracy. And it's surprising because in the meantime we know the consequences. We know what it means not to having a democracy. So, I mean, how is it possible that we in our time face the decline and fall of democracy? Well, let me first briefly explain why I make this statement. The essence of a democracy is not based on having a free vote and institutions. They are important, but they are not the essence. And in 1938, it was the German novelist and Nobel Prize winner Thomas Mann who went to America to give a series of lectures, and it turned out to be the start of his exile because he could not return to Hitler Germany. And the topic of his lecture was the coming victory of democracy. And that's a lecture tour from coast to coast in America. And more than 2,000, sometimes 5,000 Americans showed up to listen to him, which is impossible nowadays. Who can spend 2 hours, because that lecture was 2 hours, so it's, you cannot give lectures anymore of 2 hours, of an old German with a heavy accent, and still those Americans were coming to listen to him. And he starts with saying, something very important. He makes an apology. He said, look, I'm coming from Hitler Germany. Who am I, you Americans, the country of Franklin Roosevelt and of Lincoln and Whitman, to tell you about anything about democracy? But he said, coming from Hitler Germany, I learned a lesson which I think is very important for you to know. And what I want you to know is that, as I just said, but I was quoting him, he said, I've seen through the Weimar Republic how easily institutions can fall if you do not take care and do not cultivate the spirit of a democracy. Because the spirit of democracy, that is what the true essence of democracy is. And the spirit of democracy is about elevating people, is to make everybody thinking human beings who still feel responsibility for the common good, for the whole society. And if you don't take care for this spirit, eventually democracy will fall. Only 2 years later, when he gave a lecture in Los Angeles, he said, my fellow Americans, but then he spoke about my fellow Americans, let me tell you the whole truth. If ever fascism will come to America, it will come in the name of freedom. So this was 1940. Now let's go back to our time, right? 80 years later. What is it that we see? We see, well, what we have forgotten is that democracy is a very elitist idea, because it's the most difficult form of government. Next to the fact that it's the best of the worst, Churchill, is also the most difficult one. And why is the most difficult one? Because it demands of every citizen to be a citizen and to be well educated and to be a thinking human being and to feel responsibility for everything around you. And that's no longer the case. What we are facing is, first of all, enormous propaganda. Enormous propaganda. Now also through the internet. And with the internet and Facebook and Twitter and the tyranny of algorithms. So imagine you're interested in topic A. And you Google topic A, because now everything is Google. Then Google will show you, well, you also might be interested in that, which is all the same. So then you go to number B. And so in the meantime, so if you want to understand why people start to believe in all those stupid conspiracies or a part of the conspiracies, it is because they live literally in the cave of Plato, right? Plato's Republic, that people are living in a cave because they cannot see reality anymore. That is happening in our lifetime. So there is the propaganda, then there is the brainwashing. The brainwashing is that the purpose of life is to be rich, famous, etc., etc., etc. Then the lies among them of Mr. Steven Pinker and Bill Gates. There is a new Holy Trinity, and the new Holy Trinity is science, technology, and money. With science and technology and money, we can solve everything. Well, it's simply not true. So we are no longer cultivating the spirit of democracy, and that will explain, and this is my latest, that yes, Joe Biden won the elections of America, but Mr. Trump got almost 10 million more votes. After 4 years of lying, after 4 years of the most awful politics, he got 10 million more votes. But again, you know, let us look in the American mirror. What is that we see? We see Hungary, we see Poland, we see the fascist party in your country, Fox, we see the fascist parties in my country, Wilders and Baudet, we see the fascist party in... So this return of fascism is a real thing. It's not a fact. I wrote about it 10 years ago, and I regret very much to be absolutely right. That's what we see. And what is fascism? Fascism is that kind of spirit which wants to destroy the spirit of democracy.
I want to bring you back to something that I believe is very important in what you said, which are to restore this ideal of democracy by bringing back what you call the values of humanism. Mm-hmm. And you were referring to Donald Trump, and I came across this list of values of humanism that you put forward, which are truth, justice, and compassion. And if you look at Trump being a president against truth or manipulating truth to his own benefits, appointing very last-minute Supreme Court judges to precisely hamper the idea of justice in America, and showing no compassion whatsoever for other groups of society, of American society, that are not his own groups. And we could fear, really, that these values of humanism in America, but also in the West in general, are basically being forgotten when we exercise democracy. The big question to me is, how do we restore a value-based democracy?
Yeah, well, I have a few ideas about it which are not very popular, but still my ideas. One, let's demolish all business schools. Because the business schools are those institutions which are cultivating a complete different set of values which are now invading the whole world. It's no longer about truth, justice, beauty, compassion. It's about efficiency, it's about productivity, it's about how to make profit, it's about innovation, it's no longer about creation. So this whole mindset that it's the economy, it's the economy stupid, right? I mean, Bill Clinton's line in 2000, or sorry, in 1994, that became the mindset of our time. One of the things that we absolutely lost is a notion of quality. Everything is now about quantity, and because it's quantity, it's about numbers. Everything in our world is reduced to a number. So what is in the world of quantity and numbers, what is better? The higher number, the biggest number. But there was always a bigger number. So we are now in awe of the influencers because they have 1 million followers. How stupid they are, but they have 1 million followers. It became a world of celebrities because the less celebrities are most known. In politics, it's about numbers. Economy is about numbers. I mean, it's all about numbers, but the whole notion of quality and the quality of life, which can never be put in a number, as you cannot put love in a number, as you cannot put friendship in a number, as you cannot... And that again relates to Sheila is already complaining about it, that the idol of our time is usefulness. Everything has to be useful. And so what is useful can be put in numbers. The numbers are the region of the economist. And so the economist can tell us what is important, yes or no. So, no literature, no humanist education. But again, the stupidity is that everything what makes your life and our life we're living, you cannot put that in numbers. I mean, that you have a child, can you put it in numbers? That you meet the great love of your life, can you put it in numbers? That you finally start to understand something about the meaning of life, can you put it in numbers? No. But to have these things, to have this understanding, to have, you know, a certain idea on what the meaning of everything is, you need the world of culture. We do not need technology, we do not need I mean, I'm a fan of technology, it makes it possible that we can fly. I'm a great fan of science, especially medical science. You know, it saved the life of my mother for many more years. I mean, I'm not against all these things. But we have forgotten and dismissed something truly important, which with all the social consequences. And one of those social consequences is that we are taking a shortcut to new forms of tyranny.
I want to challenge you a bit on this.
You should.
Because you criticize scientificism, let's call it like this. You know, everything has to be put in numbers, as you rightly say. You criticize the trilogy between science, technology, and money at the expense of humanism. And let me put it this way, you seem to criticize as well all research, including in social sciences, that is based on data sets, and that forgets the most important value of the things that are being studied. At the same time, we live at a time when, with the coronavirus crisis, we are all expecting from scientific developments that, be that through the emergence of a reliable vaccine or the emergence of a good treatment for coronavirus, this very much depends on science.
Completely. So, but they are two different topics. Look, it's wonderful that we now live in a time where, due to medical research, we are pretty far away. I mean, when you had heart problems in the 70s, you had this open heart bridge to London, and it took hours, you know, to get your operation, etc., etc. Now, basically, they can deal with many heart issues. We have the phenomenon of transplantations, lung transplantation, kidney transplantation, of which my mother benefited when she lost her kidneys. So that's all wonderful. And yes, given the pandemic, we are waiting for the vaccine. But did we already discuss what is the cause of the pandemic? Did we already discuss how it's possible that this virus is creating so much havoc in our world? How that relates to how we're dealing with nature and how we're dealing with the environment. And if we don't change our own attitude, we can wait for the next pandemic in 2, 3, 4 years. And it will go on and go on and go on because we are destroying the planet. And there is a deep connection with that. So that's one thing. The other thing is that my problem with the notion that science is alpha and omega of everything is a complete, you know, first of all, it's a form of hubris, but next to that, it's missing the notion of what it means to be a human being. And in this respect, there is a famous line in the Tractatus of Wittgenstein, where by the end he has this notion where he writes, even if all scientific problems would have been solved, we still would not have touched upon the questions of life. The questions of life, about the meaning of life, about the accursed questions, etc., are beyond the scope of science. And of course, this relates to what are we doing with education, right? If so much of our education is now STEM, science, technology, economics, mathematics, and it is artificial intelligence. Yes, wonderful, and artificial intelligence will be there, and it's there to stay. But we need something else as well to be able to cultivate our own life in a society in which everybody, wherever they come from, so I'm talking about a pluriform society, in which people from all parts of the planet could be welcome, can live their life in dignity. Because that seems to me, the essence of everything, that you can live your life in dignity, which means also we need a social economic system in which people do not have to die from poverty, in which everybody can count on healthcare, in which everybody can have a decent education, in which people can develop their talents, in which there will be no war, violence, destruction, all these things. Democracy is the only governmental system what can provide that, with social democracy. And so that in the United States of America, socialism is a dirty word, and that this now criminal organization, the GOP, the Grand Old Party, it became a criminal organization, as you see how they organize steal the vote and all those terrible things. That they are brainwashing so many people, that you should not have socialism, in which they also deprive a society of the most fundamental forms of solidarity. I mean, so what makes America now exceptional? America is exceptional, that is basically a third world country with world power. But it is a third world country. There is no difference between Brazil and the United States of America. A wonderful country for the happy few, but God forbid if you're not part of the happy few, then that society is a hell.
Which brings me back precisely to politics and the state of politics for what you are mentioning now. And something that you cover very bluntly in your work is the return of fascism. You talk of fascism without the difficulty to talk about fascism and the re-emergence of fascism as being conceived for so many as an inconvenient truth. But you say, no, let's rightly point out the re-emergence of fascism, and you actually define it with as follows: as an anti-democratic spirit that uses the letter of democracy to destroy the spirit of democracy. Isn't it too much to speak about fascism returning? You think that this is really the same situation that we were in the past?
Very much so. And more to come. Again, when I made this statement in 2010 because of the things which were happening in my country, the Netherlands. And I thought, if in this extremely prosperous country, the Netherlands, which has not facing any difficulty since World War II, right? Okay, well, except of the flooding, but in 52, but nothing. If I can see the return of the fascist mindset, at that time in one party, now we have two parties, which became accepted by the political class, because we have to make a deal and a coalition, etc., then I thought that can happen everywhere. And indeed, I mean, this was way before Trump. This was way before Bolsonaro. This was way before Orban. Way before Poland, etc., etc., etc. So, so why is it that why you think it's important to talk about the return of fascism? A few reasons. First of all, this was the warning by both Albert Camus and Thomas Mann in 1947 after the war. After the war, and they lived through the fascist era, right? So they knew what they were talking about. And of course, the whole novel La Peste of Camus is about this. It is about the fact that if a democracy turns into a mass democracy, when it's no longer cultivating the humanist values and the moral and spiritual values, but are cultivating everything what's part of a mass society, mass psychology, the propaganda, when people are no longer aspiring for cultivating humanist values, but are driven by the instincts of fear, greed, hatred and all these things, and you get a politics with demagogues who are cultivating those instincts. Again, and the king of Twitter, Mr. Trump, is the master of these things, but again, you see it everywhere. Then both Camus and Thomas Mann said, don't make the mistake, fascism will return. And it's a very foolish, stupid idea and a bit of arrogance that because we make scientific progress and because the economy is booming, fascism cannot return. Yes, it can return. So that's one thing. The second thing is that the word populism doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. And the interesting thing, and it relates you just referred to it, that we find it difficult to live with inconvenient truths, which is a very natural thing, right? With an inconvenient truth, if you are confronted with something inconvenient about your own behavior, it's difficult to admit. And so I mentioned an inconvenient truth, which was in the 70s when the Club of Rome was reported, which was the biggest warning of if we don't take any measures now, we will destroy the planet and you'll get what we now call climate change, and we ignored it for kind of economic reasons. No, it cannot be that bad, etc. Well, it's that bad. We no longer have an excuse when Churchill, on February 18, 1933, gave a big lecture in London. And Hitler was already in power, right? Because Hitler came to power at the end of January. So it was February 18. Still then, Mussolini said, quote unquote, and you can find it on YouTube, you can find it on everywhere. He said, you know, we are now living in a difficult time, and probably the best way out is the fascism of Mussolini, who's the great hero of our time. Churchill, it took him a few more years to realize what fascism is all about. Freud, the same mistake, you know, it's in 1935 that he's still sending his books to Mussolini, you know, you're the cultural hero of our time. And there's a long lineup, you know, of all the intellectuals who all want. So, but we know now better. We know what fascism is. We know how with, through propaganda and with demagogues and cultivating xenophobia and all these things, bit by bit, they will destroy the spirit of a democracy. And that is what fascism is. Now, unfortunately, the academics trying to be really scientific think always that you have to come forward with a definition and stupidly they think, well, we can only talk about fascism when they are dressed in black, when they make silly gestures like this, only then we can talk about fascism. Or as they used to say when I published a book in America, yeah, but there is no violence. Well, hang on. We have seen what Mr. Trump is doing and how Proud Boys, etc., how he's cultivating. And we know these things. It's very easy, you know, to cultivate the violence and because it's already in the rhetoric, it's already in the words, and then it will come. So, okay. It's very inconvenient, it's very embarrassing, because we are very rich and we are very prosperous and we have all the science sector and blah, blah, blah. But let's admit the fact that we made a big, big mistake. That we did not live up according to our own standards. That we all started to live in our own cave or our own comfort zone. And that the academic class is totally ignorant. And that for the politicians it's very difficult to admit it because it's a little bit embarrassing. And you know, I also want to be re-elected. So we are together, we are all cultivating a lie. You know, we're cultivating our own lie. Well, again, Trump won 7 to 10 million more votes. Biden only has, well, yeah, sure, he got more votes than but the popular vote. But if you look at the swing states, it's with a difference of 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 votes. It's not that much. And God knows, Trump might go again in 2024. And then, as I recently said, he will not disappear. I mean, have you seen the movie The Joker? That is what Trump is, and that is what he will do. And so, being this evil genius, he's there to stay. He will cultivate his base. He will never concede. He cannot do that, because then he will lose their trust. And then in 2024, his opponent will be Kamala Harris. It will be interesting to see then what happened in America. In the meantime, what are we here doing in Europe? We are a so-called union. Well, it's not a union, and it's a joke. We live in the rich part of it, so we don't like Spain and we don't like Italy. You have to take care for your own things. Why should we? We accept Orban and the people in Poland because whatever. And so this should have been a moment for Europe to step forward and say, well, you know, we acknowledge all our crimes of our day, yet we have something to offer to the world. We have something to offer in terms of humanist values. We have something to offer in terms of social democracy. We have something to offer in how you organize healthcare and pensions, etc., etc., etc. But we cannot step forward. We cannot show China, Russia, America the idea of Europe. And this because the people in Brussels have no idea about the idea of Europe. Nor your government, nor my government. They're completely ignorant.
And perhaps this is due to also something that you explore in your writings, which is that we have stopped believing in our own dream. At some point, we were confident in the West that our system of organizing politics, our way of organizing economics was going to last forever, and not only last forever, but be adopted by others in the same image, in the thinking of Fukuyama's end of history, right? And you say that that dream is over, that we do not have anymore that capacity to project that dream, nor of that dream to become true. And that instead, what we have is anxiety coming back to ourselves. So how can an anxious body project anything good, anything that is for others to look at it as a model for following and so on? Isn't it because we have lost confidence in ourselves and that we should restore our confidence, or is it just that there are plenty of other systems available and then ours is not just one of them, but one of them? Okay, there are a lot of questions, so let me unpack them. Yes, there are a lot of systems. Plato already describes them in the Republic. But if you want to cultivate a form of government, that means to say that you want to live in a society where, as I just said, everybody, wherever you come from, whatever your gender, whatever your race, whatever your faith, can live together in peace and in dignity, and deal with, you know, your own quest to the meaning of life, that can only be democracy. It can only be democracy. So that's one thing. A second, now, as anxious as we are, we have nothing to provide. You know, what we do, what Europe again is doing, is digging and hoping for Mr. Biden to step forward and to solve with our issues, right? Because we don't have a constitution, we don't have an army, we are not Europeans. And here it's even worse. You know, I mean, you're Catalan or you're of a different part of this poison of nationalism and your national identity as if that is everything. And again, in the Netherlands, the same thing. So the European poison is back again. The third thing is, as you absolutely correctly said, well, we lost our confidence. The question is, why is it that we lost our confidence? Why is it that we lost our self-confidence? Well, there was a famous pupil of Sigmund Freud, Erich Fromm. And Erich Fromm went to America, lived there in exile, and he wrote an excellent book entitled The Sane Society. He wanted to know what is a sane society. And one of the arguments he makes is that in the 60s and in the 70s, seduced by, you know, all the materialism and all the economic richness, we started to believe that our confidence should be based on materialistic values. So we started to have faith in the banks and the pension funds. They would take care for our money. And they would care for us when we are older. We gave our trust to them. There we spent our confidence in. So we didn't cultivate our inner strength. We didn't cultivate our talents. Because it was only, you know, as long as the banks are doing well, all will be well. Okay, and then we had 2008. And the huge crash, and we now know you can no longer, you can no longer trust banks. You cannot trust the financial world. The financial world is there for itself, idiot.
So, you know, why should you put, but in the meantime, we lost the capacity. We lost the capacity, you know, to deal with life. So, last Saturday, we had our Nexus conference, despite all odds, in Amsterdam, a new age of anxiety. And one of our guests was Mrs. Dita Kraus. Now, Dita Kraus is now 91 years old. And she's known as, quote unquote, the librarian of Auschwitz. I think it was even someone of Spain who wrote the book about her, the librarian of Auschwitz. And so she was there and she started to talk about, you know, what it means to be in Auschwitz. And what books started to mean for her. And everybody was silent and everybody was almost in tears when you hear those stories. The big difference between Dita Kraus and nowadays millennials is that nowadays Dita Kraus went through anxiety. There is not much she's anxious about, not even the pandemic. She lived in hell. But nowadays millennials are the generation of anxiety, and they are anxious about everything, And one of the reasons they are anxious about everything is that most unfortunately they were educated by this idea of I'm okay, you are okay. Oh, everything is wonderful. They started to believe that you have to have at least 300 or 500 likes, and if you don't have 500 likes on your stupid Facebook thing, they get into depression. So they have not been able to, given the opportunity, to develop a kind of certain strength, to deal with life. You know, unamuno, to deal with the tragic sense of life. So, next to that, latest number in the Netherlands, I do not know how the situation is here, 25% of the youngsters who are 15 years old, 15 years old, are cultural illiterate. They can read traffic signs, they can read the text of a television program, they cannot read a book. 25%. In 3 years from now, they will be, they are entitled to vote. So, now, this is not a plea of a return to Auschwitz and to educate people. But we have to understand there is a deep connection, because that was my main question to her, the famous statement of Primo Levi just before he died. That the purpose of him being a survivor, the obligation for him being a survivor was to tell the whole world it happened and therefore it can happen again. And for us that's almost unbelievable. Now, you know, we are way beyond these things. And so I asked Dita, I said, what do you, she said, he's absolutely right. It happened and therefore it can happen again. And again, we don't have to go that far. If you see what's happening in the midst of Africa with Boko Haram, with ISIS, and other phenomena. So it is crucial to understand that we cannot live in a civilized world without the spirit of democracy. But if we want to live the spirit of democracy, we have to go back to Spinoza and understand that all things difficult are as excellent as rare. And you can go for the easy life, and you can go for your Facebook, Instagram, whatever thing, but you live your life as a fool, and you're co-responsible for the decline and fall of our democracy.
On that note, I would like to thank you very much, because I take from our conversation that anything bad that happened can happen again. And one recipe that I think is very valid for us as human beings, but also for the societies we live in, is to cultivate this inner strength that we have, both internally, but also in our political systems. So probably this is a good way to start the reflection on what's next and what sort of tools can we put in order so that we re-heal our bad state of democracy. So Rob Riemen, founder and president of the Nexus Institute, thank you very much for joining CIDOB, the Barcelona Center for International Affairs, on this conversation. I'm very glad to have you in Barcelona.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.